Ladies and gentlemen, be seated. Good morning, Mr. President. This is a very special day. Not one, but two events of great importance happening today. So that we don't steal their spotlight, we persuaded Mr. Donald Trump and Chairman Kim to conclude their meeting in Singapore before we begin here today in Riga. It was not easy, but we succeeded in arranging that. So the news from Singapore is that they are done and we can begin, and the world's attention can now turn to us. A warm welcome to all of you to Riga STRATCOM Dialogue 2018. My name is Edis Bosch. I'm a journalist and a university lecturer, and I will be your host. Well, not really a host. I will be more of a master of ceremonies, showing people around and saying that they're over their time with their presentations. Because the real host is Jānis Sārts, director, as most of you know, the director of NATO's STRATCOM Center of Excellence. Jānis, can I invite you over here to give us an overview of what is it we're going to be doing today and tomorrow? Jānis, please.
Thank you, Eddie. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, Excellencies, Generals, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Riga. Welcome to STRATCOM Dialogue, third STRATCOM Dialogue conference we're having. These are times of uncertainties. And it is a moment where it is very important to understand what is that underpins the change we're seeing in our societies, in our information consumption habits, and then in the way our social processes are taking place. That is going to be the focus of these 2 days, to take a look what makes an impact on us, how we process information, how technology affects it, and how it affects social processes, and in particular, elections. Because in a democratic society, there's no process more important than elections. Once you lose trust in that process, so much else is at stake. This time, I would plea we don't dwell too much on what we see what is happening. So many formats have been discussing it. I think we have to concentrate on what are solutions, because looking at a problem doesn't solve it. That's why, for this conference, we have shifted the format in a way that you can not only listen to what people say, you can engage. And I ask you that in particular in the breakaway sessions that will follow each main panel, you think how you can give your own points, what you can contribute to the debate. That is very important. I have to say, we are strong. We have 700 people registered for this event from 42 countries. I take that gives very different perspectives, rich background for the debate, and even richer background for the potential solutions. I have to admit that STRATCOM has not been always a straightforward idea. Some time ago, when the idea was dreamed up, it was not universally acclaimed as a great idea. As many of these important things, it starts with a difficult kind of acceptance process. But what is important that you have important key people at these moments to support. And one of the persons that has been at the very beginning of making our Center of Excellence, we have here today with us. President Raimons Vējonis when he was still in Ministry of Defense, we were together thinking about the ways how make this center to be. And although for many of you in this audience it looks like a very straightforward idea, it wasn't. So it was a commitment from a people like President, as well as I see the former Chief of Defense. I would nod to you also in the participation on that. So it is really key, and I'm so glad that now, after 4 years of center being and third conference, I have a privilege, an honor to give a word to His Excellency President of Latvia, Raimons Vēnis. Please.
Your Excellency, Prime Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the third RIGA STRATCOM Dialogue Conference. I'm delighted that this event has grown so much since we first met in 2015. It was also the first conference for me on the position of President. We live in a complex world of many challenges, and they range from avoiding nuclear war through terrorism and migration to global warming, aging, and environmental protection. These challenges have deep roots, and there will be no quick and easy solutions. Therefore, we should identify and address the causes rather than just react to the symptoms. We need to understand better what is going on and in particular why it is happening. Technology is progressing on this enlightening speed, and there is a tendency to focus here on the search of solutions. I believe that this is fundamentally the wrong course of action. We must put people ahead of technology. Of course, we need to understand how technology is changing our world, the daily lives of our people, and the ways we communicate. We must seize the opportunities this offers. But then we must also recognize what risks may arise. In the last couple of years, we have done much to strengthen our hard security. NATO's EFP is an important step in increasing our defense. While this is essential for our safety, we must also take the next step. That is to strengthen our soft security capabilities. The battle for the hearts and minds of our populations is increasingly taking place in the moral and cognitive domains. Our Western values are under threat from rivals targeting our social cohesion, shared norms, and economic and institutional structures. Public trust to the democratic election process is under attack. These are challenges to the very foundations of our democracies. To defend ourselves, we must communicate about, with, and between people. We must understand their needs, motivations, and thinking. Far-sighted strategic communication is a central part of this work. It offers us a tool for dialogue, for interpreting problems and their root causes. It allows us to frame solutions towards our intended goals. Strategic communication is about creating changes and being the architects of our own future, rather than merely reacting to events. This is why it is called strategic. This will only work if communication is at the foundation of our public service. This requires professional training based on science and research. It also requires an awareness and basic media literacy and on the part of the public. This has to be formed through the development of critical thinking, and essential for success in the modern world. To end, I would like to remind us all that strategic communication is only the third step on our path. It will only be successful if it is based on strategic thinking, following by strategic planning, and of course, after communication comes strategic implementation. Essential if we want to reach our aims. That means sticking to the chosen course, the strategy. I am glad to see that since the STRATCOM Center of Excellence was established in 2014, strategic communication has increasingly been a part of decision-making in many countries, including Latvia. The importance of the center has been properly recognized. I wish very successful, fruitful, and very active conference. Thanks, and of course, enjoy the stay in Riga.
All right, as the president and the director pointed out, the battle for hearts and minds is on with new tools and methods. Therefore, this conversation we're going to be having over these 2 days is a very timely and important one. And I'm delighted to see that the room is really packed. If there is not enough space, not enough seating for all of us, there's actually a lounge on the level -1 through these doors, through these stairs over there, with live stream as well. So you're with coffee and the rest of it as well. So just another item before we go on. I'd like to encourage all of you to play around with your smartphones. Not a typical suggestion for a conference proceeding, but we really have a conference application, specially designed one for today and tomorrow. You had a link sent to you with your registration information. It can also be easily found on the internet with application STRATCOM events. So download it, install it. It has a lot of useful information on it, basically about the speakers, about the proceedings, about all of the materials. We saved a lot of trees by not printing all of that out. We're trying to be very, very green here with this conference. So, having said that, let us begin. And let us begin with reflection. Everyone's installing the applications. Okay, let us try and listen and play with our smartphones at the same time. My kids can do it, so you can do it as well. So let us begin with a reflection on how our mind works and how we make our decisions. Mr. Gilan Gork is our first speaker. He describes himself as as a professional mentalist. Sorry about this. Happens to the best of us. He has authored a best-selling book, Persuasion Games. And he will now have an opportunity for 40 minutes to play his persuasion games with us. Let me introduce Gilan by way of this video as well.
Lovely to be here. Good morning, respected leaders, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. I just look around and I heard that there are over 40 countries being represented here, hundreds of us gathered here today for, I believe a very similar goal at the end of the day. We want to be able to influence and positively impact the people around us and our nations, ultimately the world. I'm absolutely honored to be here all the way from South Africa. Even though I actually do have Latvian roots, my late grandfather was Latvian, so it's great to almost feel like I'm coming back to my roots. But I have a short amount of time here with you guys this morning, and so my goal will be to give you as much value as possible in the short amount of time. But before we get started, I do have a question, because I'm always curious when I am introduced as being mental or a mentalist. How many of you have actually heard of a mentalist before? Can I actually just see from a show of hands who's heard of a mentalist? Okay, a few people. Okay, let me ask this question. Who is familiar with the TV show called The Mentalist? Show of hands, yes. Ma'am, your hand went up, was one of the first hands. Are you a fan of the show? You've watched lots of episodes? You've watched, and you've enjoyed them? So look, whenever I see a hand go up that quickly, I have to ask a question. And there's no right or wrong answer, so don't worry, just be honest. Did you watch The Mentalist because you actually think mentalism is cool? Or because you think Simon Baker is hot? Which one? Be honest. The second one? Thanks for being honest. Thanks for being honest. Hopefully I can do mentalism a little bit of justice here this morning. If you've never heard of what a mentalist is, let me tell you what a mentalist is by first telling you what a mentalist is not. Now, a mentalist is not a psychic. If you had seen my name on the program and had Googled me, perhaps you would have seen videos of me on radio and TV, reading people's minds, predicting what they're going to do or say ahead of time. It could seem kind of psychic. There's absolutely nothing psychic about me. In fact, there's quite an academic side to what I do, ranging from nonverbal communication, body language, psychology, even elements of showmanship to be able to do what I do. But I figured before we continue, for those of you who have never experienced a mentalist before, shall we try one quick experiment, just to give you an idea. And now here's the thing, with the experiments, I do need people randomly selected to help me, to make sure that there's no favoritism. I'm going to throw this ball of paper behind me. Right, so yeah, I need a man to catch this ball of paper. So if you're a man, and it comes close to you, please catch it, all right? If you're a lady and it lands in your lap, please pass it to the closest man. I need a man for this experiment. So here we go. Let's make it random. Here we go. Let's do it over here. 1, 2, 3. It's landed around there, almost in your lap. Oh wait, who's the gentleman with the paper? Yes. So now, by the way, what is your name? Thomas? Thomas, just to make sure, because I do get accused of chatting to people beforehand, we've never met, right? No, we have not. In fact, you have absolutely no idea what it is that we're about to do right now, right? No idea. Thomas, let me write. Is it the traditional spelling, Thomas? Thomas. Please excuse my handwriting, which is quite poor, but did I write that correctly, Thomas? Pretty good. Thomas, here's what I want you to do really quickly. I'm going to ask you to think of your telephone number. I want you to think of any 2 digits from your telephone number. Do not choose 0, because most people do, because all telephone numbers have 0 in it. So do not choose 0, but have you got 2 digits in mind? Very good. I want you to look at me and count out loud from 1 to 9. Go. Okay, Thomas will, excuse my handwriting, say. Okay, Thomas, I've written a little message down here for you. I'm going to show it to you in just a moment, but I want you to commit, so you can't change your mind. Commit to everyone here, out loud, tell us, what is the number that you're thinking of? 53. Are those both in your telephone number? Yes, and there's no way that I'll know what your telephone number is. We haven't met before. There's no way I'll know any of that information. You chose 53. I told you that I wrote a little message down here for you, Thomas. I'll show it to you for the first time. I wrote, Thomas will say 53. Check it out. Give Thomas a big round of applause. In fact, Thomas, hold on. I have, for being such a great assistant, you can have a copy of my book. It is signed. Thank you very, very much. I do have another copy here, and actually I'd like for you to have that copy. Thank you very much. Right, so, influence. Why influence? Why am I passionate about influence? Well, obviously I use certain bits of influence in my job as a mentalist, but influence has a great impact in my life. We don't have time this morning for me to tell you the impact and the way that I use influence, but I do want to share with you a story, a man's story of influence that does impact every single one of our lives here. Let me grab my clicker. And I wonder who recognizes this gentleman. Does anyone recognize this guy here? Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the man who invented the World Wide Web. Now, at the time that he invented the web, he worked for the organization CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research. He faced a massive challenge. He had to influence his employers at CERN to support him working on this thing called the World Wide Web. But once he invented the web, he faced an even greater challenge. What was that? To influence his employers to make the World Wide Web available to the public royalty-free. Now, had he failed to influence that to happen, would you agree that the World Wide Web, and actually the world as we know it today, would not exist? Do you agree with that? And so the lesson that we take out of this story is that so often in life we have brilliant ideas that will change the world. But so often in life, the ability to be able to influence people to buy into those ideas is often even more important than the idea itself. You can have an amazing idea, but if you can't influence people to engage and to buy into it and breathe life into it, then it doesn't matter how good it is, right? And that's why I believe that influence is the number one skill for us to be able to develop, to deliberately develop and guard and use, to be able to achieve anything truly significant in life. And so today, I'm going to share with you my rapid influence formula. And my goal is to share with you something that you can use practically the minute you walk out through the door. And this entire formula is built on the subconscious questions that people's brains are asking about you every single time they interact with you. And the more positively you answer these questions, the faster you'll be able to establish influence. Now, on this theme of subconscious influence, by the way, if I say subconscious influence, does that make sense? What's influencing our mind when we don't even realize that it's being influenced, right? So I thought just to bring this theme to life, let's try a little experiment that has to do with subconscious influence. I have the word influence here because it is my favorite word, but it's also on screen because I've written it on this envelope. Now, inside this envelope, I put the results of this experiment. If everything goes right. And it's written, it's actually printed on this piece of paper. I won't pull it all the way out right now. But if everything goes right, hopefully the results will match what's in this envelope. We're going to get back to this in just a moment. I am going to need somebody who looks trustworthy just to hold this for me. No, let's, no, I'm kidding, you look trustworthy, I'm just kidding. You can keep that for me. Your name is? Thomas, another Thomas. It's amazing. Right, Thomas, hold that for me, we're going to get back to you in just a moment. Thank you very much. Here's what I want everyone to do. Make your minds completely blank. I'm going to count from 0 to 9, I'm going to click my fingers. I want you to think of a 2-digit number. Please do not think of your birthday, do not think of your lucky number, do not think of your unlucky number. And here's the thing, I just want you to allow influence, to just allow yourself to be influenced. Just, as you think of the word influence, as you see the word influence, I just want you to allow yourself to, all manners of association that come to mind. And when I click my fingers, think of your 2-digit number. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Are you thinking of a 2-digit number? Everyone's got one? Yes? Right, I'm going to need someone to come up and, actually, ma'am, in the green, would you mind to come up and help me? Thank you so much. You can leave your stuff on your seat. Please give her a round of applause as she comes up here. There are stairs over here on the side, I believe. Oh, or you can also come up there. What is your name? Alicia? Alicia, thanks for coming up. Would you mind to stand over here, right in the middle? You've got a 2-digit number in your mind as well, correct? And everyone else has got a 2-digit number in their mind. Here's what I want you to do. Are you good with maths? Are you good with maths? Not really? Don't worry, we'll use a calculator. We'll use a calculator. All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to put your 2-digit number into the calculator. Go ahead. Okay, now that's a very interesting number. You might see other numbers coming up that relate to it. It's okay if I see it. Here's what we're going to do, Alicia. I'm going to put my own number in. I'm going to just add it like that. Now we'll press add again. I want you to think of another number, but look at me first. Think of another number now. Have you got it? No, change your mind. Another one? Yes? Got it? Okay, put that number in. Put that number in. A 2-digit number, and now press equals. And you probably could have done that in your head, right? But here's what we're going to do. We're going to now multiply it by another number. So I'll let you know exactly which buttons to press, because we're on a time limit. We don't want to go over time by pressing the wrong button. So don't press anything until I tell you exactly what to press, okay? Lisa, you're doing a great job so far, but now I need another number. I want all of you to think of your number, repeat it in your mind over and over, but do not let your lips move, please. Over and over and over again. So do me a favor, would you please quickly count out loud really quickly from 0 to 9? Go. No, don't tell me your number. And you had the wrong one anyway. So would you quickly go from 0 to 9, thinking of your number, but don't say your number. Go ahead. No, I don't want yours now. I want yours after the next one. After the, because you hold that thought. I am coming back to you. I want your number, but after the next one. Ma'am, what is your number? Yes. 26. Remember I said the same digits are going to start coming out? 26. Oh, we need to just go ahead and unlock like this. Press. Okay, so we're going to multiply, press multiply, and 26, and press equals, and you can see it getting much bigger. Alicia, here's what we're going to do. We're going to multiply by another 2 or 3 numbers. We'll keep pressing multiply, and only at the end, we'll press equals, okay? But I'll give you the very next number, and I said that I wanted yours. What is your number? 72. Do you see the twos keep on going? 72. Press multiply immediately. Multiply immediately. We're going to do that 2 more times. I'm going to need. Sir, what is your number? 52. 52. You've already pressed multiply. Press 52 and multiply again immediately. And we're going to get 1 more number. Do you see all the twos coming out? It's unbelievable. 1 more number. Sir, what is your number? Yes. 76. The lady next to you can either go to 77 or 75. What do you want? No, we're going to either add 1 or subtract 1 from his. 77 or 75? Pardon? 75. Press 75, and equals. Equals. We got a really long number. Okay, so here's the thing. Let's write this down because it's really long. Okay, Alicia, you're doing a fantastic job. Let's write this down. If you wouldn't mind to call out digit by digit for me. Go ahead. Call it out. 3, 304 30741. Okay, because it's quite a large number, we're going to divide it in half. So just put out your hands like that, and you're going to, let's say that 3043 is in this hand, and 07141 is in this hand. And you're going to throw one of those away, not the phone. You're going to throw one of the numbers away to me, 3043, or you're going to throw 07141. Which one are you going to throw away to me? Actually, throw it. 3043. Are you sure you want to choose that one? Are you positive to choose 3043? You don't want to change your mind? Please change your mind. No, I'm kidding. No, she does not have to change her mind. But have I given her fair opportunity to change her mind? But you chose 3043. Would you mind to hold that for just a second? We have got, Thomas is holding our envelope over here. 3043. Would you please look inside here, Alicia? Open up. There's a piece of paper inside. Would you please pull it out? Would you please show everyone what is printed on the piece of paper? It is 3043. Please give Alicia a big round of applause. I'll take that. Thank you so much for helping. I do appreciate it. And you can take your seats. Thank you so much. Thank you. I get as excited when it goes right at the end because it's gone wrong so many times before. All right, so let's move on. And by the way, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to share with you guys something interesting about this that you might not have realized, but I'm going to keep that until the end. What I want to get to straight away is my rapid influence formula. It's really deconstruct influence so that you can get what you want in really practical and positive ways. Now, I already mentioned that this is based on the subconscious questions that people's minds are asking about you every time they interact with you, not only personal interactions, but also if they're interacting with a brand. The same 3 questions apply. And the more positively you can answer these 3 questions, the more quickly you'll be able to establish influence with people. So let me give you these 3 questions as I take a sip of water to build the suspense. Right, so here are the 3 questions. The first one is, are you reliable, or can I rely on you? The next question is, are you capable of helping me? Everyone has their own goals. They all need help to achieve something in their life. Are you capable of helping them? And the last question that they're asking themselves is, do you care about me? Do you have my interests at heart? And it's where these 3 come together that we find that ultimate influence. These 3 questions can be answered over a long period of time, but they can also be answered rapidly. And that's what I want to share with you here today, is how do we answer these 3 questions as rapidly as possible? And the answer to that question is by using mental shortcuts. Now, what do I mean by mental shortcuts? Well, your brain is taking mental shortcuts all the time, whether you realize it or not, whether you like it or not. This is a way that our brain manages to process the world around us, to cope with the world around us. And I'll give you an example of how you're using mental shortcuts right now. Here you can see a picture of me smiling, turned upside down. Or is it? Because if we turn it around, you can see it's actually quite a grotesque picture of me, right? Which has been digitally altered. I can't actually make that face. This is famously known as the Thatcher illusion. Now, here's the thing. Why do you see a picture of me smiling when it's turned upside down? Well, you see, your brain is so used to human faces since the moment it was born that it has just enough clues, the shape of a jawline, eyes, nose, mouth, for it to jump to a conclusion. Well, that's a picture of him smiling turned upside down. Let me give you another example. Something maybe a little bit more logical. What do you think happens more often in the world? People dying of stomach cancer or in car accidents? I want you to call out your answer on 3. 1, 2, 3. Right. Would you agree that probably 95% of us say car accidents, and wherever I speak in the world, this is the same case? But the real answer is stomach cancer. But why did you feel like it was car accidents? Because you didn't have the information in front of you, so you went with a feeling, right? With what felt like the right answer. Why do you think that is? Well, we see pictures of car accidents far more often. We hear about it. We're driving all the time. And so it's more easily available for your mind to recall that. And so it gives you this intuitive feeling that that could be the right answer. And so, in the same way, when you meet people, they are developing this feeling based on these shortcuts on whether you are reliable, whether you're capable of helping them, and whether you care. So we want to work with these mental shortcuts. Now, by the way, these mental shortcuts are called heuristics, which are these shortcuts that our brains take to help things like judgments and decision-making occur really quickly. And so for the rest of my time with you, I want to share with you 3 psychological principles of influence and match them up with each of the 3 questions in the rapid influence formula. And my goal is to give you something that you'll really be able to use the moment you walk out through the door. So, the goal is to answer these as fast as possible using heuristics, starting with the question about reliability. And for this, I want to share with you a principle of social proof, a coined term by Robert Cialdini. And here's social proof in a nutshell. Your brain uses whatever cues and clues it can to establish the validity of something, or how valuable something is, or if it's good or bad, or right or wrong. You don't just rely on your own experience, you also rely on the experience of other people around you. So much so that we start to believe that if lots of other people believe something, that chances are higher that that is true. That's the heuristic, that's the mental shortcut that your brain is taking. We don't even need to see or hear other people saying that something is true. Just the idea that other people believe something is enough to influence us to think that it's true as well. So, I want to share with you an experiment conducted by Cialdini in hotel rooms. Wherever I travel around the world, I'd like to take these pictures of these bathroom signs. I'm sure you've seen them everywhere you go. This was at the Orchard Hotel in Oxford when I was there. Do you really need to have your towels laundered? Well, here's the experiment that they conducted in a hotel. They had the cleaning staff check off who was reusing their towels. They had 5 different versions of the towel. Here are the first 4 versions. Help the hotel save energy. Help save the planet. Partner with us to help save the planet. Slightly different angle over there. And help save resources for future generations. And when these 4 signs were used, towel reusage went up an average of 16%. But there was a 5th sign that used social proof, and it read like this. Please join your fellow guests in helping save the planet. And then they had a statistic from a resource-saving program that they ran. I won't bore you with the details, but they framed it in this way to say 75% of guests participate in our resource-saving program by reusing their towels more than once. And when this sign was received, towel reusage went up 44%. Massive difference from 16%. And then they tweaked it just a little bit more. Now, I want you to imagine that you get back from the conference, you get into your hotel room, you switch on the water to have your shower or your bath, and you're undressing, you've got your towels next to you, and suddenly you see this sign. And it says, please join your fellow guests and help you save the planet. 75% of guests staying in this room reuse their towels more than once. I love what Cialdini says. The first thing that you probably think is, I hope it wasn't that towel. I think I would think the same as him. I like his way of thinking. But here's the thing, is that the social proof shows it went up to 49%. So the lesson that we take out of this is, instead of trying to persuade people all by yourself with your own capabilities, rather point to what many other people are doing and allow that to persuade them. And this is amplified by similarity. And let me just give you a quick example of that, since we're also talking a lot of technology in this conference. Let's just say that you're on Facebook, for example, and 2 ads, let's just say for a product. The identical product, it comes up, this ad has 100 people that like it, this one has 20 people that like it. Which one is more influential? The one with the 100. Now, let's say that these are 100 anonymous people. You have no idea who they are. These 20 people are your friends. Now, which one is more influential? The 20, right? So it's amplified by that sense of similarity. I really enjoyed the research that the Behavioral Insight team in the UK conducted around social proof to really make a difference. with legacy giving. Legacy giving when you donate to charity in your will. And the organizations that they were working with found that while 35% of people roughly said that they would donate to charity in their will, only around 7% of people actually did. So they conducted an experiment. They had two different groups. Each one consisted of thousands of people. If someone would call in, they had the will writer who would have one of two different questions that they would pose. The first group had the plain ask, which is, would you like to leave any money to charity in your will? Whereas the second group had the social norm ask of saying, many of our customers like to leave money to charity in their will. Are there any causes that you're passionate about? And the results speak for themselves. If you have a look at the graph, with the social norm, they had 15.4% sign up to legacy giving compared to just 10.8% or the baseline of 4.9%. Just using that little bit of social proof. So when it comes to the question of reliability, just know that people are more willing to rely on you or the recommendations you make if you provide evidence that many other people already believe that you're reliable or that your recommendation is reliable. So you can start using it in that way. So that is reliability. Let's jump straight to capability now. And for this, I want to share with you the principle of authority, which is that people are more rapidly influenced by others who they perceive as being authorities or being knowledgeable, credible experts. And this was demonstrated so powerfully in 1963 by the psychologist Stanley Milgram in what has become famously known as the Milgram's experiment. Now, subjects in this experiment believed that they were testing the impact of punishment on learning, but actually they were the subjects to see how they would respond to authority. Milgram tested this on thousands of people. It's been recreated several times around the world, and it would go like this. First, the subject would meet another participant who's actually just an actor, and they would be tricked into choosing their roles as the teacher or the learner. Check it out.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Learn. Teacher.
And if you could just tell me what your positions are. Learner. Learner and teacher. Learner.
So there you saw some footage from the original Milgram's experiment, as well as some footage from one of the favorite recreations that I love to watch by a fellow mentalist in the UK, Darren Brown. But here's the thing. Once those roles had been chosen, and by the way, the subject would always be tricked into choosing the role as the teacher, they would be taken into another room where the scientist would strap the learner, who's just an actor, down to a chair and connect him to an electric shock generator.
Now what I'm going to do is strap down your arms to avoid any excessive movement on your part during the experiment. Is that too tight? That's all right. Okay. This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn.
Is that comfortable?
That's okay, yeah.
Yeah, we just place these straps around your arms just to avoid any excess movement.
Once this had been done, the instructions were read out to the learner, which is that he's to remember word pairs and then to identify the correct word when offered multiple choices.
Now if you get it correct, fine. If you make an error, however, you'll be punished with an electric shock. So of course it is to your advantage that you learn all these word pairs as quickly as possible.
Once the teacher had witnessed all of this, he was taken into the next room and shown the electric shock generator, which ranged from just 15 volts up to a lethal 450 volts. Once he had been shown this, he was then given the instructions, which is to ask the questions, and every time the learner would get it wrong, he would increase the voltages and administer the electric shocks.
If he were to indicate the wrong answer, you would say wrong. Then tell him the number of volts you're going to give him. Then give him the punishment.
Now, the real test was to see, would the teacher call a stop to the experiment, or would he continue to the highest shock voltage on the board, just because the scientist was asking him to? Now, according to plan, the learner, who was the actor, gave many wrong answers, and so the shock voltages went up. But at around the 150 volt mark was when the teacher started to hear audible protesting and complaining coming through the speaker and microphone system from the learner in the room next door.
150 volts. Answer, force.
Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue. The next word is sad.
Do I make you going?
Continue, please.
Oh, sad. Sad. Face, music, clown, girl.
Now, of course, the learner was not really getting the electric shocks. Actually, these were pre-recordings that corresponded to the different shock voltages on the board, and the higher the voltage shocks became, so did the intensity of the complaining and the protesting.
That's wrong, 150 volts.
Cup. That's wrong. 225 volts.
Take it off! I've had enough of this!
He's in a lot of pain,
Continue, please.
but he's not comfortable.
We must continue to the end of the experiment. Whether the learner likes it or not, he has to go on until he's learnt the words correctly.
Clown and girl. It's wrong. 165. 165 volts. Time.
Please continue.
Before conducting this experiment, Milgram asked 40 psychologists to predict how many subjects would continue to the highest shock voltage on the board. They predicted 0.1%, and they were wrong. 65% of people continue to 450 volts just because a man in a white lab coat was asking them to. He was not forcing them to, but they listened to him because he was the expert in the room. Now, obviously, there are many reasons why, even since we're children, we're conditioned to respond to authority. But this authority and this principle can be used with extremely positive influence as well. Because, of course, influence is like a surgeon's knife. It can be used for great good or for great evil, depends on the person using the tool. And so how do we use it in a positive way? Well, the first thing, in the first place to start, is to establish that you're a knowledgeable, credible expert before you make your influence attempt. Now, we played a video just before I came up on stage. Would it have the same effect if I played that at the end of the talk? Probably not. Or if, when a speaker is called up, if their credentials are read at the end, it wouldn't have quite the same effect. So, you can give authority or create that directly, say through a testimonial or an introduction, but also indirectly. Research showed that when physiotherapists had their qualifications in a frame on their wall, their patients were more likely to do their rehab exercises. That would be an indirect way of doing that. But I want to share with you a really great case study of a real estate company in the States that trained their secretary to make an expert introduction when people would call. So, for example, they'd answer the phone and say, "Oh, you're looking to buy here in Riga? Well, let me put you through to Joe. Joe is actually head of sales. He's been with the company for 16 years. He'll definitely be able to help you. I'm putting your call through now." That didn't cost them anything to do. It didn't put the potential buyer under any kind of pressure. And what they found was a 20% rise in appointments and a 15% increase in the number of signed contracts, just by creating that subtle authority. So when it comes to capability, people are more influenced to follow your lead or to buy into your ideas when they're exposed to indications, either directly or indirectly, that you're a knowledgeable, credible expert. This is why, by the way, there are some campaigns, political campaigns, that are built on either creating authority and credibility or discrediting or taking authority away from other candidates. It's that powerful. Let's move on to care in the last few minutes that I have with you guys, which is such an important piece of the puzzle here. And to really activate this, I want to share with you one of my favorite influence principles to teach, which is reciprocation. And reciprocation is our sense that we should give back to another person once they've done something positive for us. So, for example, if you're driving in traffic and somebody lets you in when it was tough to get in, you would probably reciprocate by letting another person in down the line. Or if you have children and another child invites your child to their birthday party, chances are you'll feel obliged to invite that child to your child's birthday party, right? Or how did I use reciprocation right here as well? Well, I gave a book out knowing that I wanted to call, it's Alicia, right? Yeah, to come up here. And let me ask you a question. Did you feel more obliged to come up because you had received something from me? You anticipated it might happen. Okay, good. Well, but this is okay so long as you know that I have good intentions. If you felt that was going to be bad intentions, then obviously it wouldn't work so well. But there are little subtle ways that you can use this. But I really want to share with you guys a couple of dynamics around reciprocation. Professor Dennis Regan from Cornell University conducted a famous experiment called the Art Appreciation Experiment. I don't have time to go through it all today, but what he found was that people responded to reciprocation even when we don't ask for the favor, even when we don't like the other person, and even if the return favor is at a higher expense. Because of that feeling of indebtedness that we have, and we're hardwired. If you speak to anthropologists, I mean, that's how professions were formed. Because I would get really good at doing this one thing, you'd get really good at doing that one thing, and we'd do it for each other. So it's how civilization has built. You know, there's a strong social stigma attached to being labeled as someone who does not reciprocate. I mean, I don't know about you, but definitely for me, growing up, I always had that one friend that when the bill came, they got this look on their face. And I knew that they forgot their wallet again, right? When we're out for dinner or for lunch. We don't want to be that person, right? So who has the power then? The giver or the receiver? The giver has the power, right? The power is in the hands of the giver. And so we need to be the first person to give. Not in terms of, I'm giving to you, now you owe me. But just to give and knowing that people, when the time comes and you need their support or you want them to buy into your ideas or whatever it may be, that they're going to give you that support. But I want to share with you quickly a dynamic around reciprocation. This is kind of the secret sauce to really activate this. This is where a lot of people miss this. I want to share it with you by giving you some research that was done in the States with tipping. Now, back in South Africa, where I'm from, we also give about 10% tip. But they had 3 different groups of waiters. They wanted to see who would get the highest tip. So the first group of waiters would walk up to somebody and say, here we go, sir, here is your bill, and inside would be 1 sweet in the bill folder. And when 1 sweet was given, that waiter received on average a 3% higher tip than if no sweet was given. Then they had the second group. The second group would walk up to somebody and say, here we go, sir, here is your bill, and inside would be 2 sweets. And when 2 sweets were given, they would receive on average a 14% higher tip. But there was a third group. The third group would say, here we go, ma'am, here is your bill. Inside would be 1 sweet. And the waiter would start to walk away and then stop and turn back. You know what, ma'am? Just for you, here's another one. Now, how many sweets have been given? Still 2, and yet this group received a 23% higher tip. What does this tell us? It's not just what we give, but how we give it. So, besides being the first person to give, make sure that it's something personal or something that's done in an unexpected way or given unexpectedly. I'm not talking about just physical things, because I've used the example of the sweets. Have you ever met someone any time in your life, and then a few months later, when you bumped into them and you didn't expect that this would happen, they remembered your name? And what did you feel? Like you wanted to give back to them. You wanted to give them attention because they gave you respect and attention. So it's even in the small things. In terms of world affairs, I mean, this is a story that I absolutely love. When there was $5,000 donated in relief aid between Mexico and Ethiopia, and when you see this, you might initially assume that it was Mexico donating to Ethiopia. This was in 1985. Ethiopia wasn't in a very good place. But actually, it was Ethiopia donating to Mexico. Why? When they were in such need. Ethiopia could have done so many other things with that money. And when journalists asked, the response was, because in 1935, when Ethiopia was being invaded by Italy, Mexico helped them. And so they prioritized to send that money over to Mexico. So even almost half a century later, and that reciprocation was still holding strong, stands the test of time. So in terms of care, people are more rapidly influenced to do things like buy your ideas, give information or help or commitments or concessions, and more if you provide these things first. Sometimes it's risky to be the first to give because you're not sure if other people will give back, but the science shows that if you're the type of person who's the first to give in a way that's unexpected and personal or personalized, it's going to come back to you. So that answers the question of care. In summary, when we answer these three questions, are you reliable? Are you capable of helping me? Do you care about me? What we're really creating here is trust, credibility, and a sense of support and loyalty. And you can create that quickly to give you the window, the opportunity for people to allow you to deliver on those things over time. And of course, you need to deliver on those things to maintain that trust, credibility, and support. My time is up, but I did promise that there was something interesting I was going to share with you from the experiment we did at the beginning. Remember, we did an experiment, I said, around the theme of subconscious influence, and I showed you guys this word, which was also on the envelope, and we came to the number of 304307141. Each person who I asked to call out a number, would you just put up your hands? Each person who called out a number, put up your hands. Did we prearrange anything at all? No. Was that random? Yes. And we got to 304307141. Now, I'm really happy that 3043 was in the envelope. But that's a really interesting number, 304307141. Now, at the beginning, I told you that I placed the results of the experiment inside the envelope. What I did not tell you is that the results of the experiment were on the envelope as well. If we turn it around, and I'll do it on the screen so everyone can see, the word influence turned upside down is 304307141. It was in front of you the entire time. Thank you. Now, while you mull over that, let me just end off by saying that I truly believe that if we're more deliberate about how we go out and influence people by answering these three questions, by creating that trust, credibility, and support, we'll be able to achieve anything we want, because influence is the number one key to be able to lead, sell, market, or inspire on a whole new level. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to engaging in the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Gilan. Judging from the applause, you got your manipulations gained you a lot of fans right here. You know, I was 53. I mean, how did that happen? You know, there are a lot of military people who need to write reports back to their ministers and institutions what was happening in the conference, and I was wondering how will they describe. So he played a trick with number 53. I still could not figure out how it happened, but you know, I'm reporting that for you. All right, that will be a very useful memorandums they will write. In any case, let us begin our first panel, and I will just introduce those who will be on the stage. Dr. Michael Platt, please welcome Michael. He's from the University of Pennsylvania. Yep, take whichever seat you want. Professor Jan Engelman from the University of Amsterdam, please. And the panel is going to be moderated by Mr. Alex Eichen. He's Executive Director of Communication from the UK Prime Minister's Office. So, right. Art of decision making, that is going to be the topic. Alex, so either way, either there or here, you have until 1 o'clock, because then we have to break for coffee.
Very good.
They're all yours, please.
Thank you very much. Real pleasure to be here in Riga, and I'd like to express my thanks to Yanis and his team for the organisation, the expert organisation, and endorse his call for action. And this conference, Yanis, is a tribute to your work, the third Strategic Comms Dialogue. We've heard wise words already from the President of the Republic to put people before technology and understand their need. And it is great, as Yanis said, to see such an audience in front of us, people of expertise, authority, leadership, achievement and success. And that's just the Assistant Secretary of NATO, Tajan Ilcem, let alone everyone else in the hall. But it's great to see all of you. I am here because in addition to the role on the screen, I head our national security operation. And we have been tested for the last 100 days in a very practical way in the art of decision-making and influencing, since an extraordinary, unexpected, probably unpredictable event happened. And the poisoning in the country town of Salisbury in the United Kingdom has led to a campaign that has gone from that country city right up to the United Nations in seeking to deter our adversaries, build an international coalition and reassure the British public. So in terms of my role, this is a very practical and important lesson for us all. So we've got a great panel. You've heard from one of our panellists already, but you're also going to hear from Michael Platt, as Director of the Wharton Neuroscience Institute, and Jan Engelman, Assistant Professor of Neuroeconomics at the Amsterdam School of Economics. After we've heard from Michael and Jan, we're going to have a question and an answer. In terms of influencing people, I think my opening thought is this. Fake news can temporarily beat fact, but it cannot overcome a compelling story. And how we tell that story and how we influence people is critical to the success of our democratic states and our shared and common values to overcome those destructive influences. So, welcome our panel. I'm sure we're going to have an interesting conversation. We're going to hear from Michael and Jan. So I would now like to offer the stage to Michael Platt to talk to us about information and influence, the art of decision making. Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, Mr. President, Mr. Director. It's an honor to be here. Thank the organizers for the opportunity. And an old Chinese curse goes something like, may you live in interesting times. So I feel like we are blessed in 2018 to be living in one of the most fascinating ages in history, because we are confronting some incredible challenges. The decisions that we make right now will be having an impact on the future decisions that we can make in terms of our planet. Technology threatens to disrupt and potentially outright eliminate many jobs across the world, and this is leading to economic dislocation. Combined with tribalism, is really threatening social harmony. And we see this every day across the world. And as we have heard a couple of times this morning, we now know that the internet, social media, really has the incredible power to shape thoughts and feelings and behavior. And this often occurs through fake news, which can be very, very powerful. And when we factor into that, the possibility of using personality targeting through Alex Nix and Cambridge Analytica, sort of the poster childs for this, it's incredible what you can actually do to shape people's behavior by knowing a little bit about them. A few likes on Facebook is as good as knowing somebody's spouse. Okay, and we don't know how far this actually has gone in the past, and if we don't understand that, we may fail to, we may make similar kinds of failures in the future. Now, economists will tell you that the more information you have, the more options you have, the better the choices you will make. And what I'm going to tell you is that, in fact, that's really not true, because the structure and function of our brains place very strong constraints on the kinds of decisions we can make, and they shape our behavior very strongly in ways that we are completely unaware of. Now, traditional approaches to understanding what's going on in our heads when we make decisions, relying on psychology, right, surveys, asking people questions, these are very limited in terms, these approaches are very limited in terms of the insights they give into what's actually going on in your head, because people either don't have very good access to what is driving their behavior, or they don't want to tell you. Okay, as an experimenter, we know that if you ask people questions, they often don't want to reveal what's actually motivating them. And so my proposition, and the proposition that we have at the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative, is that if we understand more about the human brain, how it's structured, how it functions, and we can actually tap into those brain signals, we can amplify on our ability to understand what's actually driving people's behavior. Okay? And one thing that we have learned over the last, say, 10 years is that, in fact, our brain physiology limits and constrains the number of options we can usefully consider. So this is often known as the tyranny of choice, in which when you are confronted with a bewildering array of options, as in in a typical convenience store, you have trouble making a decision, it takes you a long time, and you often feel bad about it afterward. This is not some outcome of psychological irrationality. It just reflects the very fact that brains are limited in terms of the energy that they can expend on any one option. And so what our brains do is to normalize or divide out the value of any one option we're considering by the number and value of alternative options available. It's just the way brains work, down to the level fundamentally of neurons. So think about when you're confronting something like in the US, in California last week, the so-called jungle primary, in which there were dozens and dozens of candidates running for each office. Okay, that fundamentally challenges the ability of any brain, any human brain, to make a reasonable decision. Now, this same principle of physiological constraints also accounts for what are known as decoy effects in decision making. Okay, what's a decoy effect? A decoy effect is when you have two options, one of which is clearly preferred to the other, like a cheap bottle of wine to a more expensive one. If you now add a third option to the set that's much more expensive and that you would never consider, that often shifts people's choices, okay, to the option they wouldn't have chosen. This is just falls out precisely from these energetic constraints and this normalization process that occurs in the brain. Now, when we think about kind of traditional voting processes in the United States, for example, where you might have two candidates, the addition of a third-party candidate who is more extreme than either of the other two, like Gary Johnson on some dimensions, can shift people's choices from what they had originally preferred to another option. So when we consider choice sets that are presented in the voting booth, right, we need to take these into consideration, these just pure physiological constraints. Now, another big domain in which our brains are strongly influenced, right, in the decisions we make are the social domain. And when we are making choices about who we want to elect for government, right, our brains are actually responding spontaneously and unconsciously to information about those individuals. And one of the really great discoveries over the last 10 or 15 years in neuroscience is that we now know that there is a dedicated circuit in our brains that is devoted to dealing with other people. Okay, it's often known as the social brain network. This circuit is responsible for identifying who's around us, remembering them, paying attention to them, and ultimately understanding their experience through empathy, and also making or forming a mental model of what they might be thinking, which both of those together guide how we respond to them. Do we help them or not? Do we cooperate or not? Now, it's really interesting to consider this social brain network when we think about all the ways in which others are currently affecting our behavior. So when we think about the migrant crisis here in Europe or in the United States, how do our brains respond to people, okay, who we don't normally run across, people from different ethnic groups, for example? And so I'm going to turn to some work that was done by a postdoctoral fellow in my lab back when he was a graduate student in China, and he did a very simple experiment. He had people watch the following two videos. I just want you to watch the videos, okay, and you can think to yourself what you feel. Okay, so here's one video. I saw a couple of sad responses in the audience. Okay, here's another video. Okay. So what did people feel? Anybody? Does that look like a pleasant experience? First of all, I have to tell you that these are fake needles. They actually just push up into the syringe, so nobody was actually injured during this study. So what my postdoc Feng Sheng did was he had people who were either ethnically Caucasian or ethnically Chinese watch these two videos. He asked them what they felt, Okay, and they felt like what people here in the audience probably said they felt. That felt painful. I didn't like that. I empathized with that person. But what he found when he looked in their brains using brain imaging, and he focused on a particular part of the brain that's identified with empathy, and we know that activity in this part of the brain predicts how likely you are to help somebody that you see in pain. He found that here on the left, in an ethnically Chinese observer, watching a Chinese woman apparently, penetrate with a needle, you see a big brain empathy response, and nothing for watching a Caucasian individual penetrate with a needle, and exactly the opposite. Okay, for Caucasian observers seeing a Caucasian person penetrate with a needle, big brain empathy response, somebody from another ethnic group, nothing. This is really, I find this very disturbing. This is really kind of challenging, and unfortunately I think hits home with a lot of our experiences, I think, very recently. But it's not all to be despaired. So it turns out that there are ways that you can rescue this brain empathy response. And one way you can do it is to emphasize the commonalities that you share with an individual. And so in a simple experiment that Feng did was he repeated this other race effect on empathy, but he had the person in the video either wearing the same colored t-shirt as the subject or a different colored t-shirt. So if the individual is wearing a different colored t-shirt, you got the same blunting of empathy for somebody from the opposite, from another ethnic group. But now they're on the same team, and you rescue that brain empathy response. Now, we don't know how long that lasts. We don't know, all the dimensions that it might apply to, but it suggests the very real possibility that policies and practices that emphasize inclusion and humanizing other people from other ethnic groups, will go a long way toward rescuing this empathy response. And I see that I'm really way behind on time, so I'm going to keep pushing forward. Another way in which our social brain network is shaped by our context is power differential. So power, social dominance, socioeconomic differences powerfully shape and regulate the way our social brain networks actually process information about others. And one way that's really important and interesting is that it changes the way that we take the perspective of other individuals. So in a classic experiment by Adam Galinsky from NYU, he asked people to remember a time or to imagine a time when they felt very powerful and then write the letter E on their forehead so that somebody else could read it. So if they were thinking about being powerful, they wrote the E from their own perspective. And then if they were not thinking about being powerful, they wrote the letter E in a way that would be readable by somebody else. So just thinking about being powerful reduced perspective taking. Now this is something that's deeply baked into our brains, deeply wired in. So we have shown the exact same thing in monkeys, not with writing letters, but instead if you look at the likelihood that a monkey will actually turn and shift his gaze in the direction that another monkey is doing it, it's a very basic form of perspective taking. High power monkeys don't do that. They don't follow the gaze of anyone except high power monkeys. Low power monkeys follow the gaze, take the perspective of everyone. And we now know from the work of Matt Lieberman and Emily Falk that brain imaging shows that activity in the social brain network falls off as people are more powerful. So this is a rating scale. Basically, think of yourself on a ladder. The higher up on the ladder, the higher ranking you are. People who are the highest ranking in this study, self-report, show the lowest activity in this social brain network, which we know is responsible for processing information about other individuals. So finally, I want to turn to a study that is ongoing in our lab where we're thinking about how we can use some of this information to build emotional rapport, to build empathy, not necessarily just between people, but between people, for example, and a political party. And our hypothesis is that, in fact, we use this same social brain network to bond with, to form an emotional connection with a political party. And we've actually been testing that not with political parties right now, but with products and brands. And so we've asked the question to people who are either Apple iPhone users or Samsung Galaxy users. We have them see, they're lying in a brain scanner, an MRI machine, and they're hearing positive and negative news about either their brand or the other brand. And people basically report strong empathy for their brand. Oh, I'm an Apple user, something good happens, stock goes up, I feel good. Stock goes down, I feel bad, but not so much for Samsung. Same thing for Samsung users. But kind of surprisingly, what we find is that their brains tell a different story. So if we look on the left here, Apple customers who hear good news about Apple, we see activity in reward areas of the brain. They see bad news about Apple. We see activity in pain areas in the brain, and nothing when they hear news about Samsung. But now look at about our Samsung customers. They hear good news about Samsung, there's nothing. No activity in reward areas. They hear bad news about Samsung, nothing. No activity in pain areas. And in fact, what we do see is the opposite, sort of reverse empathy or schadenfreude for hearing news about Apple. And if we go beyond that and just look at what the activity in these individuals' brains when they're hearing news about their preferred brand or not, for Apple, anytime an individual sees Apple news, it activates a part of their brains that's involved in their own self-identity and personal value. In Samsung users, it's thinking about other people. Okay, so what has Apple done? Apple's won the game here. Apple has created a sense of identity and inclusion within a group that evokes strong empathy for the brand. And Samsung has not done that. That means a third brand could come in and easily steal these Samsung customers. So think about that from the perspective of politics, right? How can we use some of these techniques to help us to understand and build better, stronger emotional connections between political parties, for example, and ourselves, and that's something that we're actually testing in the lab right now. So I'm probably over time. I'm not going to read these to you. Take your phones out, take a picture, and you can take it home with you, and you'll remember everything that I said. So thanks for your time.
Michael, thank you very much. At least we all now know whether we are an Apple brain or a Samsung brain. So perhaps that's one advance, but there were lots of other things, including the fact that fewer options are better for us, and the way we respond and empathise with people, and some of the perils of political extremism. So thank you very much, and we'll get to that in questions. Jan, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Hello. Now you can hear me, I think. Excellent. So it's great to be here. Very exciting to share some insights from neuroeconomics with you. So I'll be discussing some decision biases that you might be aware of already in some degree, but I want to apply this to the context of social media, and specifically I will focus on overconfidence here. So before I came out here, I did a quick search online looking at how the, standard media treats social media. And what I found is, actually this is no longer surprising to most of you, I guess, is that the standard media credits social media with quite a bit of influence on, recent political outcomes at a global scale. So for instance, it's been credited for starting up the Arab Spring, and this example here on Wired, but also it's been credited for outcomes of the recent EU referendum in the UK, the recent presidential election in the United States, and current debates that are ongoing in the United States about a number of political debates. This has also been picked up in the scientific field, and you see that researchers from psychology and neuroscience are picking up on this and looking at social media as a potential data source in their studies. So it's becoming more and more important, and it's being credited with a lot of influence that it might have on our decision making. And so I was wondering what had happened, because basically at its principle, social media is just a way for us to share our thoughts, maybe some pictures of our babies with our friends. So what has happened in that it can influence us now, influence our decisions, and even influence decisions at a global scale and collectivistic decision making. And to answer this, I looked into decision biases. So there's actually quite a large literature already in behavioral economics and psychology that has looked into these kind of decision biases. And if you just do a quick search on Wikipedia, you find that there's over 150 cognitive biases that have been identified by these researchers. It's actually closer to 200. And these can influence the ways that we make decisions. Moreover, this work has been extremely well received in the scientific community. So there are 2 recent Nobel Prizes that have been awarded in the field of economics. One to Daniel Kahneman for his work on prospect theory. He identified, for instance, the decision bias of loss aversion and framing effects. And another one just last year to Richard Thaler for his work on bounded rationality, as well as starting the field of behavioral finance. So these decision biases are important in the field of science, but also how we make decisions when it comes to social media. And I want to focus on one decision bias for the rest of my talk, namely overconfidence. And to illustrate what overconfidence means to you, I just want to do a quick thought experiment. Just consider for yourself your own driving skills. And then have a good look around in the room and think about whether you think that you're better than 50% of the other drivers in this room. Now, I want you to answer this question privately. I don't ask you to raise your hands. But what's typically found in these kinds of experiments is that about 70%, up to 93%, and these are probably people, these are definitely people from the United States that are heavily overconfident there, answer this question that, yeah, sure, I'm better than the median. And that's statistically just not possible. So this cannot be true. So people are overconfident, and actually a large amount of people are overconfident. And when you then look at what experts say about overconfidence, for instance, Thaler and de Bond say, perhaps the most robust finding in the psychology of judgment is that people are overconfident. Kahneman, in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, says overconfidence is widespread, stubborn, and costly. And he actually dedicates almost a third of his book to the topic of overconfidence. And finally, Scott Plous, who is a social psychologist reviewing this psychology literature, says that there's no problem in judgment and decision-making that is more prevalent and more potentially catastrophic than overconfidence. But let's not simply rely on our experts here, because they are actually overconfident as well, and they have good reason to be so. Let's look briefly at some research that has looked into this in some detail. So there's some very good research from the field of economics, behavioral economics in particular, and they have focused on these guys here, traders. And this is from the film The Wolf of Wall Street, and you can kind of see that he's really confident, this guy, right? So what's been shown is actually that financial investors that are overconfident trade way too much than they should be trading. So they're making incorrect predictions about where the stock market is going and then start exchanging their stocks at a rate that is too rapid, and that leads to economic losses for their firms. The same has been shown for entrepreneurs and CEOs. When they're too overconfident, they're too risky, they enter the market too readily, and this will lead to, well, actually dropout rates of companies that have entered the market 10 years down the road in the order of about 80%. And most of these companies fail. Now, probably even more concerning is that overconfidence can also lead to losses of health and life. So there's actually a special issue on overconfidence. So the entire journal was dedicated for that year to the topic of overconfidence in medical decision-making in 2008. And one of the things that studies found is that overconfident physicians will actually be more likely to misdiagnose a patient and then recommend treatments that will not heal the patient but are risky to the life of the patient. So this is not good news. But what's relevant for our discussion here is there's this recent study that got access to a very large data set, the Cooperative Congressional Election Study, or CCES. And this is actually a study that's done annually in the United States before the congressional elections, before and after the elections. And this is a survey that is given to subjects in which they're asked about a number of opinions that they might have. But there's a subset of this data set that the authors of this study had access to, which gave them information about the media use of participants, their level of overconfidence in a number of relevant domains, such as inflation rates, but also where they are on the ideological spectrum. So are they conservative versus liberal, and how conservative versus liberal are they? And then obviously, because it's done before and after the election, there's data on voter turnout here. And so what these researchers find is that the more media you use, the more overconfident you are in your statements about, or in your estimates of current political events. And this then in turn leads to ideological extremism. So the more overconfident you are, the more likely you are to be at the ends of the spectrum, the more extremely liberal versus the more extremely conservative these people were. And these are then exactly the types of people that will go and vote. They're highly motivated to vote. So these basically 4 relationships have been quite nicely demonstrated in this study, demonstrating to us that media use is one of the sources that leads to overconfidence, and overconfidence is one of the sources that then leads to ideological extremism. So I want to take a step back because I promised you to show you some neuroeconomic insights. And I want to show you that there's additional things about the social media environment that we have to consider that actually lead to or exacerbate these decision biases that we already have, including overconfidence. So what I want to argue is that social media generates a rewarding context. It's like a framing effect, if you're familiar with Kahneman's work, that leads to even further overconfidence. And so this is one of the main insights that the field of neuroeconomics has contributed to science in the recent past. This is what's called the valuation system, and the image that I'm showing you there is taken from a meta-analysis, so that is an analysis of over 206 neuroimaging studies. And it's showing a system that we now know is intimately involved in evaluating the costs and benefits of our actions. So it's really the thing that supports our decision-making. Just to give you an idea, this is the ventral striatum, this is the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. I'm just throwing this out there, you should be aware of these terms because sometimes they're mentioned in the press. Another thing that the system does is it's intimately involved in motivating our behavior and shaping habits. And so this has actually been elegantly demonstrated already in the 1950s by a study by Olson and Milner. And what these people did, what these researchers did, is they implanted an electrode into the brain of their rat subjects, their participants, and they sent down an amplitude, an electrical stimulation into the brains of these people, not people, they're rats, and then trained these animals to push a button, called a lever in this case, for this stimulation. And what they found is that animals would readily learn this. They would start pressing the button to receive the stimulation. They would start doing this at rates of 1,000 times per hour. They would do this up until exhaustion, basically until they passed out. And they would prefer pushing this lever to receive the stimulation over eating food even when they're hungry, leading to starvation. So this is basically a wonderful demonstration of when you activate the system, you can generate addictions in a way. Now, what social neuroscience has shown us recently is that social rewards, so when we seek reputation, which is one of the things that we do when we go out to social media, right? We want other people to think well of us when we repost and share their posts. It's processed in this very same brain system that generates these habits and motivates behavior. And this has been elegantly demonstrated by a study by Izuma et al. In Neuron in 2008. And what they did with their subject is they invited them into the lab and asked them to record a video of 1 minute introducing themselves to some other person. So they have to talk about themselves. Then they asked them to fill out a large array of personality questionnaires. And then they told their subjects, well, this is going to be evaluated by a panel of people that you don't know, and you will get the feedback about the evaluation, or this very personal evaluation about themselves, in the scanner when you come back to our lab next week. And so what they found is that, well, these social rewards are actually processed in exactly the same brain region. This here, again, is the ventral striatum, and you see that social rewards, so when you get positive feedback about your person, such as is illustrated here, this person thinks that the person in the scanner is trustworthy, then the brain responds in the exact same way that it does to monetary rewards or things that we care deeply about that had been demonstrated in the literature before to be processed by the system, and that had led to the picture I had shown you before. So social rewards are processed in this very same brain system that shapes our behavior. And there's an additional thing that I want to mention about social media, the social media environment, which is that it is basically framed in a very positive way. So there's a number of things that are only possible there. It's heavily biased towards positive social feedback, so the kind of reward seeking that this previous study had investigated. Only likes and shares are possible, and there's a lack of immediate negative feedback when you interact with people in this sort of minimalistic social environment that social media offers, such as Twitter or Facebook. And this is something that we have when we have person-to-person interactions, right? We get immediate feedback from, gestures or facial expressions of people that we interact with, and that makes us probably more careful about the things that we say to them. So this kind of negative feedback is missing in social media. And we show that this is a factor that can significantly enhance overconfidence, the fact that we are in this positive frame. In a recent study that I want to show you just really briefly, so this is an experiment. It's a very common task in the field of neuroscience. It's called the reinforcement learning task. And basically what subjects have to do is they have to learn whether these stimuli are good or bad. And one of them is always better than the other stimulus, These are basically meaningless symbols, and the subject selects one of them and then learns through this outcome here whether it leads to a positive outcome, such as in this case a gain of 50 cents, or a negative outcome, such as a loss of 50 cents. And the subjects learn this very readily, as you can see here. This is their performance, and as the experiment progresses, subjects get better at picking good stimuli and at avoiding to pick bad stimuli. But one of the things that we did in this very simple experiment is we also asked subjects about how confident they are about their decisions. And what we find is that in a gain frame, so when they're making decisions when only monetary rewards, so positive outcomes, are possible, we find this significant overconfidence that I'm showing you here relative to when only losses are possible. And I want to argue that this is one of the things that happens in social media, that this positive frame leads to overconfidence. There's additional choice biases that are exacerbated by social media environments, namely the fact that we interact mostly with our friends or people that think like us. And this leads to what has been called in the literature echo chambers. So this is basically, we're exposed to one-sided information in there, and this is nicely illustrated by this study by Brady et al. From PNAS. They used Twitter data, and they looked at how information is exchanged within two networks. And in the blue you see people that would rate themselves as liberal, in the red you see people that would rate themselves as conservative, and you can see that each dot here, which is one person within this network, and the line is a reshare or a retweet of a message, that there's a lot of communication within these networks, so lots of reshares within the blue network and lots of reshares within the red network, but not much communication across these two networks. So this leads to highly correlated or one-sided information that we're exposed to in these social media environments. And this is actually made even worse by these newsfeed algorithms by Facebook and Twitter, who will show to us information that we had liked or shared before, leading to further sort of, one-sided information. Now, there's two additional biases. One is called correlational neglect. And that is, people are unaware of the fact that they're exposed to these correlated, one-sided kinds of information. So when they get evidence for something they already believe in, they tend to overweight this kind of evidence. And they almost rarely get evidence for the opposite side because of these two biases that I told you about. Okay, so to summarize what I've said is, the social media basically leads to overconfidence via a number of decision biases that this kind of context enhances. One of them is that it's a rewarding context, and I had shown you in a study that a rewarding or a positive frame leads to overconfidence. Another one is that we're exposed to correlated signals, and one that I haven't talked about so much is that these signals are typically highly salient because there's a lot of emotional information exchanged on social media, and that's exactly the kind of information that captures our attention. This then leads to overconfidence, which in turn can enhance ideological extremism, as shown by a study that I had talked to you about before, which then influences how we make decisions. So this is the cascade of how social media leads to overconfidence, leads to this, and influences our decisions that I have talked about. I thought about a number of interventions to reduce this overconfidence and these decision biases in a social media context. And one of the things that I think is critical is to start teaching our children that are being exposed to these social media contexts a number of metacognitive skills. And what I mean by that is just simply tell them about the decision biases that could influence the way they make decisions that have been identified in the literature now over the past 50 years. It's also important to teach statistical literacy, because another decision bias is for us to maintain cognitive ease, and if we don't know how to deal with numbers well, then we're kind of hesitant to engage with factual information and statistical information. And if we teach this to our children, then it would overcome this sort of cognitive barrier that we have. Now, a couple of open questions still remain. So I believe that the framing of the social media environment is distorted at the moment, but could we maybe decrease overconfidence if there is also a possibility for negative feedback and reputation loss, such as a dislike button or something like that? And if we interacted across our networks would that decrease overconfidence? So if we're exposed to information that is not so one-sided, not so correlated, but also information from other networks to give us an alternative viewpoint. Okay, so this is where I want to close. Obviously, there's many open questions here, and this is something that needs to be researched much more closely. Thank you very much for your attention.
Jan, thank you very much for taking us on a tour of the horizon from social media influence through to overconfidence and valuation systems and some of the possible solutions. So thank you. And thank you to everyone in the audience for listening attentively to our excellent speakers this morning. We have a few minutes before lunch for you to probe the speakers, to challenge them and to ask questions to dig into what they've said. So I'm going to invite questions. If no one wants to put their hand up, I'm going to pick someone at random, probably from King's College London. Neville, what did you think? Did you have a favourite speech, or was there something that particularly shone out from you from that? And it's great to see you here today, and some of the authors of the excellent Fake News Roadmap, which I would endorse, and I'm sure you'll have signed copies of that you can give out. It's available online. So, Neville, any particular thought from you? Yeah, we got a microphone coming, and please, if you do ask a question, just let us know who you are.
Is this working? Yeah. I'm Neville Bolt from King's College London, King's Centre for Strategic Communications, and I was fascinated by both speakers, actually. But what I'd like to hear, and I no doubt we're going to hear very shortly, is how our mentalist picks up on many of those arguments that were put forward, and how you have absorbed those into the skills that you demonstrated this morning.
Thank you. Good questions. Points for brevity. Gillian, do you want to respond to that?
Just to clarify, are you asking how I take the points that were discussed by the panels? Well, something that I definitely take into account, just from what Alex had said at the beginning about story, and what Michael was talking about Apple. You know, as a mentalist, when it comes to dealing with people, I often have to have people, if I'm presenting some really tricky things, I have to persuade them to participate or to cooperate and have an open mind for me to be able to work with them, because people, at the end of the day, also there's a sense of having to allow me to influence them. So certainly something that I use is the power of story, even though it's not always as obvious as it seems. So for example, the intro video that I had play really didn't say much about me right up until the end. It really put the focus on what you would get out of it. And obviously just trying to have people be inward facing and think about themselves and their choices. So I would say that the power of story to plant ideas in people's minds is so powerful, because it allows them to influence and persuade themselves, because once they connect the dots in their minds, that they're coming up with that themselves, and they own that a lot more. You know, Michael mentioned Apple. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the story of Apple, but when Steve Jobs left after producing the Lisa computer really failed. Now, they put out a 9-page advert in the New York Times for that. He then went out, worked with Pixar, which is all about storytelling, came back, and all of a sudden the only advertising for their new computers was billboards that just said, "Think different." And so what they realize is that you have to get into the heads, into the minds and hearts of people, so that they can put the dots together for themselves. And the dots that story put together for Apple customers was to say, I do think different, I do challenge the status quo. And so they developed that relationship and that lasting loyalty. So certainly I would say that whether I'm presenting something for fun, or whether I'm teaching around influence and persuasion, I'm extremely conscious about weaving in a sense of story. Sometimes without even telling a story, you can still lay out the foundation for people to build that story in their mind. And that served me really well in what I do. I hope that answers your question.
It's a great answer, Gillian. It's a great question. We've got a question in the second row, please. Then we've got the third row. But that will make it 3-0 to, as I look at it, the left-hand side of the chamber. You've got to catch up, gentlemen, particularly if you're wearing a uniform. Can I just make the point that a story is different to a narrative? A story has character, plot, setting, conflict and resolution, whereas a narrative is an explanation of things. And we've got to get better amongst our democracies at telling stories. Please let us know your name and designation.
Mark Leahy, I'm I'm Communications Director at SHAPE. The solutions that you've offered seem to me to be dangerously weaker than the problems you've outlined. So could I push you a little more to talk about solutions, because we're all stuck with providing solutions. Also wanted to highlight, we need to discuss really whether...
Mark, just hang on there, that's a big question that you've set, so I'm going to ask Michael and Jan to have a go at it, and I also want to get other people in, so let's just pause on that. Gentlemen, solutions please.
Sure. So this is a great question, and what we really talked about so far were what is often referred to as nudges. So you change the choice context a little bit, you shape people's behavior a little bit. But I think there's a much larger potential to use neuroscience tools to craft better stories, if you will. So this is now a pretty mature approach in the field called neuromarketing. So basically using brain signals, whether that's brain imaging or even cheaper, more scalable technologies like EEG and eye tracking and a bunch of different biometrics. We now know after 10 years of work that you can make a bunch of these measurements on a focus group of a couple of dozen people, and you can predict ticket sales, say, to the movies in response to people's brainwaves when they're watching a bunch of movie trailers. And you can do so an order of magnitude better than using traditional marketing approaches based on what people say they like, what they say they want, what they say they'll pay, what they remember. And that offers the opportunity to reverse engineer those particular stories to craft more persuasive messages. So we know that, for example, if you don't show a face within the first 6 or 8 seconds of a movie trailer, that movie's not going to do very well. If it's too complicated, too much talking going on, it's not going to do very well. Now, you might think this is all for just kind of bad things like selling products to people, but you can use the exact same techniques, the exact same approach to craft messages to resonate with people, to change their behavior. So my colleague Emily Falk at the Annenberg School of Communication, for example, at Penn, uses the exact same approach. We're working together to get people to craft better messages, to get people to stop smoking, to lose weight, to exercise more, and there are real outcome measures like weight lost over the next 3 months. So I think that we're on the, really on the cusp of being able to capitalize on these approaches to do things better.
Very good, Jan.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
There's a follow-up which is related, if I could.
We'll come back to you if we can, but let's pass the microphone back to our next colleague. Jan?
Well, yeah, I'd like to respond to that. So I want to defend education for a second, because as an academic, I obviously believe deeply in education. I think it actually can be very meaningful to teach, to start teaching our students, maybe even starting in middle school, that start interacting with social media about a number of decision biases that they're basically being exposed to and that might influence the way they interact with social media, and a number of these dangers. So I see my son use social media a lot, and I control him heavily. I have this app where I check what he does, and he hates it. I'd much rather sort of know that he is safe and let him do his own thing out there in the social media. But I think that this is something that, education needs to catch up on. The fact that we're being exposed to these relatively novel environments that our brains may not have adapted to very well at this point. So I think education is still a strong thing, and it's been shown that if you teach metacognitive skills, so if you make people aware of their decision biases, then hopefully they will remember this when they're being influenced by these messages on social media and counteract it. Because as soon as you're aware of a decision bias, then you have the power to counteract these biases.
Because my point is, I'm concerned that we downplay argument. I mean, even Aristotle had logos, pathos, ethos. He still thought logic and argument mattered.
Well, I think that's right, but we've got some good answers on brains and education. So the gentleman in the next row, please, yes. No, keep coming across, Let us know who you are.
Thank you. Ramsey Brown, Chief Operations Officer at Boundless Mind. Fantastic discussions, guys. Really appreciate it. Question for you, Dr. Platt. Regarding the subtleties on your ability to discriminate between the groups that you used here for the saline injections. To what extent can that get really fine-grained with how similar the groups are, or do they need to be very disparate? We ask these then in the sense of being here in Latvia and in this political context, do these need to be very, very different types of people, or are there other vectors we can use besides race, or can they be very close to one another?
I would say that we don't as yet know. So far we've taken sledgehammers to this kind of issue. What we do know is that it depends a lot on the environment in which you grew up. So if you grew up in a homogeneous environment, your brain is a pattern, generating machine, a statistical learning machine. So it's going to learn about the conditions you grew up in. So if you only see people who look like you, you become an expert at people who look like you, but everybody else looks the same, right? So we know that other race effect is very dependent on the kind of environment you grow up in. If you grow in a much more diverse environment, presumably you don't see this kind of differential brain empathy response, although we don't know yet.
Okay, so it's very, could be very geo-specific. So we could get it and show this in very subtle ways in certain places.
Absolutely.
That's super exciting.
Thank you, Jan.
Yes, if I could
And then
come...
after Jan's response, there's a lady in the back, and then we're going to go to the lady at the front.
Perfect. I'd also like to respond. We actually did a similar study in which we didn't use race. Actually, all of our, actors in our study looked the same, and we're all Swiss in that case. But what we did is we had an identifier, which was just a surname that was either from the Balkans or either clearly Swiss. And that was enough to induce the same bias. But you have to have an identifier, obviously, right? And it has to be a group that is discriminated against in your country, typically. Or, maybe that doesn't have to be, but this is what creates similar empathy bias just by using surnames, basically.
Right,
So
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Lady at the back there, please, and then we're going to go to the front, and then there's a question here. So if you want to wait till the microphone gets you, and then please let us know who you are. Thank you. Right in the back corner. There we go.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. I was really waiting for years to hearing this kind of information. Miriam Lexman is my name. I come from the International Republican Institute, it's an American organization working in democracy, support, and freedom. And I have two questions. The first question is to Mr. Platt, and it actually follows on the question before, because I was wondering, yes, I mean, we see people in our geographic constellations, but on the other hand, maybe I'm wondering if there was any research, if you have experience with the other ethnic groups only through social media or through television, because I come from Central Europe, and there are lots of Latin American sitcoms. Now we have lots of Latin American names in Central Europe suddenly, and I wonder if this influences also the way how we view people of another ethnic background. And the second question is to Mr. Engelman. I wonder, because we know that frustrations are mainly, I mean, the social media are a channel of our frustrations. So I was wondering how, if there is any research, how frustration and overconfidence are related to each other and how they influence each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I guess the question, if I can rephrase it, is whether alternative media channels can potentially shape who we identify with, who's included in our group. And I would say that we don't really know the answer to that question. I will say that we are examining, and there are a number of observations of this already, ways to take advantage of the way that our brains actually construct a sense of identity to allow that identity to extend and merge with other people. So our brains, for example, combine information from our senses, basically what we feel, our touch, what we see, etc. And so, if I see somebody who looks like me, I tend to include that person. My brain constructs a sense of identity that person belongs to. But if you do, there are little manipulations, I can teach you about it later if you're interested, that allows that construction by confusing the sense of touch and the sense of vision to allow somebody who looks very different from you to be included in your brain's sense of identity. And that leads to actually a reduction in implicit bias and a number of other things. And so we're trying to capitalize on that with some virtual reality approaches to try to increase, for example, empathy in school teachers in the Philadelphia school system for children from minority groups.
Thank you very much. Jan?
Yes, so you asked about frustration in social media, and this is actually something that has been, well, scientists are starting to research, and they call it moral outrage. So typically what you find there is that these kinds of messages that have a very high emotional content linked to an ethical issue, a moral issue, such as gun control laws in the United States, that there is a lot of retweeting and reposting of these kinds of things. So this can be used for, obviously, changing the political discussion to the better, but it can also lead to, well, taking down the reputation of some people that have done something that might be a minor mistake, but then leads to this moral outrage in social media. And one of the arguments that is being made is that, well, our brains are actually not quite ready for the type of large-scale moral outrage that you see in social media, because typically you don't encounter this in real life when you walk on the street. There are not typical scenes that would lead to moral outrage on a daily basis, whereas in social media this is something that has become very common. And so it's something that we still have to research much more closely to see how we should deal with this. But yeah, it's basically this dissemination of highly emotional content that I was also talking about, right? When I showed you the Twitter networks that interact within each other, that leads to correlated information. So I think we need to research this much more closely to understand, well, in some sense, how to counteract it, and in other senses, why this is taking place.
Thank you. We've got a question here, and if a microphone could be passed to the lady in the middle there, I'd be grateful as well, please.
Hi, my name's Gemma Calvert. I'm from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And we've been hearing some banding about words like influence, persuasion, crafting better messages. I guess you know where this is going, guys. So there's a lot of information coming out now from neuroscience and psychology about how to get people to change behavior. Now, how and whether should this be regulated? What are the ethics behind this? How do we stop information getting into, quote unquote, the wrong hands?
Thank you. I'm going to ask the whole panel to respond to that. It's a deeply philosophically important question. Gillian, do you want to start, and then we'll go to Jan and Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and it's like I mentioned really briefly in my talk, that influence, persuasion, I mean, when I think of influence, persuasion, even manipulation, I mean, when you hear the word manipulation, immediately you would think of something questionable happening. But if you had to see a mother or a father manipulating their child to cross the road safely, you know, you wouldn't really question that. So I really see these as being like the surgeon's knife that can be used for great good or for great evil, depends on the person using that tool.
You were manipulating our minds. I mean, you could be used as a force for evil.
Cannot confirm nor deny
right,
that. No.
Yeah. How do we manage the ethics? It's a hugely important question.
I'm not sure that I have an answer that would satisfy that, to be honest.
All right, 1-0 to the questioner, Jan.
On a case-by-case basis. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, only on a case-by-case basis, I think. It has to be judged by each society if this is something that we should implement or not. So, for instance, in the Netherlands, we now have a little bit of a nudge towards becoming organ donors. You have to actually, so the default now is you're an organ donor unless you opt out. So these are the kinds of nudges that behavioral economics has proposed. Other nudges are, for instance, that people are talking about, like Dan Ariely and other behavioral economists, to start not just labeling bad foods that are high in sugar and high in fat content, but also to mark them in supermarkets and have a red aisle that really shames people to go there before they start buying, well, sugary foods, right, that are clearly bad for them and lead to some healthcare costs for the entire society.
Thank you. Michael, a broader framework possible?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a critical issue, especially in the field I'm in which we're trying to apply neuroscience to business, to do business better, but in a way that makes business more effective, but also more humane. And one thing I will point out is that we as scientists do not have some sort of privileged access to what is morally and ethically right. And so, for example, our institute held a summit in February where we had people from, we had legal scholars, ethicists, people from consumer protection, et cetera, all in to discuss this issue. There is no currently accepted set of best practices available. What I always return to is the report of President Obama's Bioethics Commission, which he implemented with the initiation of the BRAIN initiative. That's a lot of initiatives. BRAIN initiative, funding mechanism that it was designed to really be a moonshot for neuroscience and to get neurotechnology implemented in human beings. And their commission came out with a number of principles I think are really important, which are, I think we would all agree on, which are consent and privacy, autonomy, human dignity, and also access. And I think that's also a really big one, which is that if any of these technologies and approaches are going to give people who have privilege even more privilege, right, because they have their brains function better, they have better persuasive influence, then we're going to just exacerbate social inequality. So that's one that I think is really important.
All right, so based around our values. Thank you. Time for a couple more questions. We've got a lady there and then a gentleman in the second row, please.
Hi, Marina Gorbis, Institute for the Future in California. Given what you know about the neuroscience and all the biases and other things, echo chambers, are there things that you can recommend in terms of the design of the platforms, the social media platforms? Like one thing you talked about is potentially dislike button, but everything we talk about is educating people and doing better on the personal side and society side. What about the design of platforms themselves?
Thank you. Jan, you want to answer that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have much to recommend here, maybe just some thought questions. So in terms of getting out of echo chambers is to expose people to information from other networks, information that is clearly decorrelated from the kind of information that we're typically consuming. And it could be suggested that this could be regulatory, regulated by governments, for instance, that Facebook has to do this, right? It's not in their interest because it will, well, decrease our attention to these kinds of things because it's much more difficult information. A dislike button is also something very difficult. Facebook is not going to like this, or Twitter, because, again, people will share less, probably, but it might be in our interest to make people more careful in what they share and what they retweet and repost, and at least think twice about retweeting something or reposting something.
Thank you. And then the final question there, and I'm going to give the panel the opportunity to respond to this, starting with Michael and then going down the line.
One point and one question. I just looked up the statistics, and road accidents seem to kill twice as many people as stomach cancer. I don't know whether you were messing with our heads.
Globally, or?
Yeah, globally. 1.3 million people die from road accidents every year, and about 730,000 from stomach cancer.
Well, the last time I checked, it was a different number, but thank you, and I will look into that. So thanks for drawing that to my attention.
I thought maybe that you were going to say at the end that we'd all believed you, and this was another trick. So I was just trying to steal your thunder. But my question to the other guys is on anonymity. That a lot of these disinformation campaigns use anonymous or pseudonymous social media accounts and anonymously created web pages. And I'm wondering, is there any data to show whether people, if they were alerted to the fact that on a sort of scale of 0 to 10 for realness, where 10 is Alex Aiken, who is a well-known person who really does exist, and 0 is sort of troll 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on Twitter with an egg, and a picture of an egg to go with it. If you give people data about realness, does that affect their likelihood of believing and sharing the information they're seeing?
Thank you. And for those who don't know, that's Ed Lucas, the famous media commentator, journalist, and all-round good guy who is real and not a bot.
That's what you think.
Michael.
I don't know of any data that speaks to that, although just a caveat about neuroscience. I mean, there's some data that suggests that just by posting a picture of a brain next to an article, people are more apt to believe it, even if it's crap. So take everything we said with a grain of salt.
Thank you, Jan.
Yeah, very good point. So this comes back to the thing that I said about statistical information and our difficulties in engaging with this, and maybe educating children to engage in this. So I think that people would pay attention to it if they could, if it was easy to them. So you have to reduce or increase the cognitive ease with which they engage in these statistical pieces of information. But I do think also that we should regulate bots and those kinds of things. And I would want to know who I'm interacting with in social media and who I'm retweeting or reposting there. So I think that should be clearly marked, to be honest. Maybe like I mean, one way to regulate this is to do this like SIM cards, right? So you have to register for it and put a real name to a SIM card in most countries in the EU, I think.
Thank you, Michael.
I just want to add one comment to this, which is everybody in this audience seems to be above a certain age. And I think we'd get very different answers to these questions if we were asking, Gen Z, Gen Y. They operate completely anonymously. They're perfectly happy to give up their data. And they grew up as digital natives who actually their brains seem to work quite differently from ours because they grew up in a different statistical environment, if you will. And I think we can't leave them out of this equation.
Thank you. Final thought, Gillen?
So just to understand the question, because I was still thinking about the number of car accidents. So I missed the first part. My apologies. I was thinking about my source for that. But are you asking if people knew whether it was a bot or not, if that would change the influence that it had? I mean, I'm a kind of on the cusp of Gen X, and I'm born in '84. So I would like to think that it would, but I'm not entirely sure as well, because I think that people do have a certain story that they want to believe. They have certain beliefs, and they'll often, things like confirmation bias, and people will seek out things that support what they already believe and what they want to believe. So I think, idealistically, I would hope that would, and I think it would probably be beneficial. Again, I don't think there's any data specifically on it, but I would imagine that it wouldn't be as easy as just putting that there and seeing a massive difference. I'm not sure, but that's my take on it.
Thank you very much. We've heard some great, deep knowledge imparted to us, the greatest gift that anyone can give, really. It is up to us whether we utilise it in diplomacy, in defence, in the political and public service spheres. I certainly will, and I think particularly Michael's focus on the use of the brain and Jan's on the way that we develop social media, and Gillen's on the way we can influence for good with a proper code of ethics around it are really important. So, colleagues, thank you very much, and I'm going to hand back to our moderator. Well done, everyone.
And a good round of applause to Alex Aiken for moderating this. It was perfect. And timing was great as well. Well, a couple of notes before we break for coffee. So, by the way, there's another feature that you might like to try out. There's this, you might become a news hero. Basically, there's a new computer game that you can try out in the lounge over there that is designed to make you a more proficient consumer of information. So basically, not really a Superman, a news Superman. Try the game. Teach you a lot of things. That's one thing. What's taking place now? So just a couple of quick notes so that you know what to expect. Basically, what follows is going to be three parallel sessions. The first one is going to take place over there, downstairs. It's Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab breakaway session. That is going to be an interesting thing, but you need to be pre-registered for it. So if you're registered for it, you head right there. Without the coffee break, that's going to be served there separately. So if you're with that session, your coffee is over there. The research lab is going to start working right now. Just head over there. You're going to be a bit late for lunch, but it's going to be served. We will be waiting for you. It's fine. The rest of you will have an opportunity to choose between two sessions. And the two sessions, one is going to take place in conference room A. You're going to find it. It's very near to where coffee is going to be served. Dagnia Lenya is going to be the moderator for that. Dagnia, are you somewhere here? Yes, please. Could I ask you just can we pass the microphone to her, please? Just one sentence, Dagnia. If you could tell us in one sentence what your session is going to be about, and then I'm going to ask Alina as well, the other moderator for the session, what the session is going to be on. Don't have any more microphones? We're running out of microphones. Well, bringing it to you. Okay, the session, Dagnia's session is on the idea that sells. I suppose you're going to be discussing stuff What makes an idea succeed in this complex informational environment? Do you have the microphone already? No. I have one over here. You want to catch it? Okay.
Yes, no, thank you, Eddie, for this
warm
welcome. So after half an hour, we will have a great discussion, which will be actually very practical. So you will learn very practical tips and tricks how to be a good leader, how to be the leader that can sell the ideas in this very, let's say, disruptive environment, what we just heard here during this panel.
Dagny, thank you very much. So if you like that pitch, you're after half an hour to conference room A. But the main stage is going to be the other parallel session, which is going to be moderated by Alina Frolova. Alina, could you pitch us your parallel session, please, very quickly?
Hi, and as soon as we need to sell ourselves, so our session will be dedicated how to we see now how the commercial and public service mix up on this stage, and this is actually the trend which is going on, and we will continue to talk about it. So what the governmental communication can take from marketing and what the marketing can take from the governmental communications, and how does it influence on the elections, on free choice. Do we still have free choice as a people, or we are manipulated and ruled by specific people, persons?
Thank you, Elena. Thank you very much. So, difficult choice to make for all of you. The two parallel sessions after the coffee break. So, now coffee, and then as one group, as one single group, we're back here after lunch at 4 o'clock. Does that make it clear? Is everything fine? Okay, good. Have a break. Have a coffee.